as I suspected. Hang on, just gonna put this down for a sec. Just gonna put this down for a sec to pull it off. Oh, hang on, no, I've got it. Let's chew the spine. So I'm going to pull the hub off that wheel. It's a temporary repair to replace it. Okay, so what happened was I was just pulling in this driveway to turn around and I lost drive. There was a bang and I lost drive. So what it was is this hub here on the intermediate right hand axle stripped the flange, the hub assembly. So what I've done, I've pulled the hub off the rear axle there, and I've put it on this one to get me home. I'll put this one in just to stop that axle floating. This is already stuffed, so just to stop the axle running around. And tomorrow I actually have 2 spare hubs which I'm supposed to have put back in the car and I hadn't. And of course that's come back to bite me. But anyway, this will get me home. It's only about 10 k's, and tomorrow I'll pull them back off and reseal them, and I might pull the others off and check them too. Alright, but anyway, we'll put this all back together and I should have drive. As far as I know, it's only stripped the one hub, but it's unlikely to have done 2, but we'll see where we go. So moment of truth, I've just fitted the rear axle hub onto the intermediate axle, just because of the stripped hub. Now, moment of truth, we'll see whether as you can see, I'm now movable. So now I'll drive it home. It means I don't have 6-wheel drive, but better to have all-wheel drive and drive home in all-wheel drive than to be driving home with the centre diff locked, winding up the axles and winding up the transfer case and gearbox and everything. On tar roads, better to just swap the hub, and a lot quicker than pulling the tail shafts out and driving it home in 6-wheel drive with on the front axle or something. Alright, cheers, catch you next time. Okay, it's the next morning. I've re-pulled this axle hub just to put my other hub on it. I'll just clean all the shit out of these spines, and I've got my spare hub with good splines. I'll put that back on, and basically what you would do is cut it roughly over the shape, and then just use a hammer to tap around the edges, and the ball peen part of the hammer to just gently tap around there like that, and it will cut all the holes in the shape of the gasket for you. Holes, and you would then get a paper gasket if you have to. And as I said, on the side of the road I've used fan belt, the cardboard off a fan belt packet, to make lots of gaskets, thermostat housing gaskets, things like that, and they don't fall apart. I would recommend, of course, replacing them later with a proper gasket, but that's only in extreme circumstances. But if you carry a tube of this in your kit, you'll always be able to make a new gasket up. So I'll have to put the phone down to clean all the crap out of here. But once I've done that, I'll show you me putting it back in again. So I've put some gasket maker on it. Okay, I'm not sure how much of this I got on camera because I just looked down and it turned off. But basically what I did was I put the hub on with the axle out, put the circlip on, twist the circlip to make sure it's in the groove properly, then pull the hub back so it's back furthest to closest to me on the shaft. Then I lifted the axle and wiggled it until it went back in. I've applied some gasket sealer. Later on I will put gaskets back on it. The gaskets act as a bit of a shim, but look, really you don't have to because there's that much play in the axle. It's not making that much difference to the play or anything like that. Now the other thing to note is these are a 17mm headed bolt. The ones on that I took this hub off, I have a couple of spare diffs, and I took this hub off another diff, and it only had 13mm headed bolts. So it's a good idea to carry a socket set. I carry an impact socket set because that way I can use them on my rattle gun, and I can just use them as normal. Plus, this is only a cheap socket, impact socket set, but they're single hex, which just means you're less likely to strip a bolt that's a bit how you're going. If the corners are a bit rounded or something, these are more likely to undo it than a multi-hex socket. So anyway, we'll just do them up. I've just got this on its lowest setting. I'll run around it with a spanner, make sure that they're all tight. I'll put my cap back on. I'll just put a little bit of that silicone just around there, just to stop it popping off for some reason as it gets a bit older and loses its tension on the hub, because the rubber loses its stretchability. A bit of silicone in there will help stop it popping off. I'll give that a bit of a wipe just so that you don't see so much blue, and that's it. That's a hub repair. Now some people might go, why did I drive home without pulling the axle? Well, I could have pulled the axle, but then I would have wanted to pull both axles and probably tail shaft too. If I was going any distance, it was starting to get dark. I was only less than 10 k's from home. I knew on that little bit of distance I wasn't going to do any damage. I just took it nice and easy. I sat on about 45 to 50 kilometres an hour on the way home. So as you can see, there was absolutely no damage done to the splines on the axle. That was a risk I was willing to take. If I was out in the middle of the bush somewhere, I would have had the hub on me, but if for some reason I didn't, and I decided you're better off with four-wheel drive than, I would have just pulled both axles and then just put the rubber cap back on and removed the rearmost tail shaft and ran it with the vacuum switch pulled out, so I had four-wheel drive, and this would have effectively just been a lazy axle. but we got home. It didn't take me that long to just swap 2 hubs. I'll now get another hub and keep it in the car as a spare, which I intended to do all along. I would have done before I'd gone away on a trip. I just hadn't got around to doing it. So now I've got a barbecue to go and volunteer at for the local men's shed, so I'll go do that. And I'm going to pull all the hubs and things off later, check the splines on them. I've had the intermediate hub off on the other side. I know it's okay, and I know I just put the hub on this one on the middle axle there yesterday, and I know it's okay, but I've got to pull that off anyway to reseal it properly. But I might pull them all off, just check them. As you can see, it doesn't take long, and it's a pretty easy job to do. So anyway, we'll throw this rubber cover on, and that was just a quick idea of how you can get yourself out of trouble. Now the symptoms, obviously, I lost drive. When you pull the vacuum switch out, the car will move because it's locking the centre diff. With an all-wheel drive, you only need to lose drive to one wheel, and the car's not going to go anywhere. With a four-wheel drive, with open diffs, you need to lose it to a front and a rear axle with the diffs, with the centre diff lock. With a six-wheel drive, we'd need to lose it to 3 sets of axles, like front, middle and rear axle would all need to have lost drive. You'd still have one wheel going forward with 2 gone. But of course you don't want to drive, even with a broken axle, with a vacuum switch pulled out in a 6-wheel drive, because then you're still winding up because you still got 4-wheel drive. So what was making a lot of racket, like when it went, you could hear it rotating. I just put it in first gear and let it idle, and then I was on flat grounds in some grass. It wasn't going to roll anywhere, and if you're worried about that, you could chock the wheels, because you can't put the handbrake on because the handbrake controls your tail shaft. So I just put it in, and I walked and had a look, and it sounded to me like it was this side and that middle axle, but once I jumped out I could hear it was coming from that middle axle. So if you wanted to be sure, you could pull that rubber cap off and you would see that axle turning. So that is how you would check to see if it was the hub. Now of course, if you broke an axle, you would still have your tail shafts turning, but you wouldn't have the axle turning, because the hub would still have a spline connected to the wheel on the road, so the wheel will stay still, and the broken section of the axle will be turning on the other side of the brake to the wheel, depending on where it broke. Now that could have been out here on the end, or most likely could also be in at the diff centre. But these are a pretty sturdy axle, and part of the appeal of leaving these in is it's the weakest point. If something's going to go, if you're stressing the vehicle off-road and something is to the point where it's going to strip, you're better off stripping a hub, which they're nice and easy to replace, than what you are breaking an axle. I do carry 2 spare axles, but if the piece of axle breaks off at the diff end, it can be a little bit difficult to get out. you could always try a strong magnet and a piece of, I've got a magnet with a eye on it, which you can tie a bit of rope to, and then you can thread that bit of rope through a bit of PVC pipe, like a small bit of water pipe, push that up through the diff tube until it touches the axle, and if you're lucky, you'll pull it out. If you're not lucky and it's twisted and caught, then you're going to have to pull the diff center out, which means pulling the axle out of the other side, tail shaft off, diff center out, or inspection plate out rather on these. Depending on what type of diff you have, some have an inspection cover, some have the actual diff assembly bolts into a fixed solid housing, but on the Land Rovers here we do have an inspection cover, so you'd have to pull the inspection cover off, which is not as bad. You wouldn't have to pull the other axle out there actually, and then you could just push it out from inside the diff using, you know, fingers, screwdriver, whatever you could to get it out. Clean up the metal, put new oil in and your new axle, but I'd much prefer to have the hub assembly strip, and it's easy to break. As I said, depending on how much of an issue they are with stripping, which I don't think. If I check them all out if I'm going to be doing big trips away, which they're not a hard job to do, I shouldn't break one while I'm away even then, but if I do, as I said, now on I will have spares on board, and very 15-minute job and you're back on the road. Anyway, just thought that'd be of interest to some people that may not know how to go about it, on how you could easily, anyone with a little bit of hands-on sort of ability would be able to do that. You don't have to be mechanically minded to be able to do something like that. Alright, catch you next time.